A question for you as we get started on today's podcast. Do you eat because you're hungry, or do you eat because maybe you're sad or you're happy, you're fearful, you're anxious? Well, I know that I do both. That bowl of ice cream or that bag of chips can actually, I think, make me feel better when I'm having an out of control day or an emotional day. Emotional eating is actually a very common thing, and it can lead to all kinds of problems from weight gain to overall health issues. And my guest today is an expert in emotional eating. I think you're really going to like the information that she is giving us today. So Kim Scheid is joining me now. Kim, it's really good to see you. I love this topic. I think it is so important. So start by telling us a little bit of how you got involved with it and what your background is.
Yeah, it's so great to be here with you, Natalie. I'm super excited to talk about this. This is such a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because my relationship with food goes, way back. And well, first of all, I've always loved food. I've been in the kitchen since I was itty bitty. I started working in kitchens professionally when I was 14. So it's always been a passion of mine, but at the same time, like kind of during those teenage years, I was really involved in dance, and I just never felt like I had that perfect, like super skinny body. So every little ounce of anything was perceived as flaw. And, that's when really the eat less, move more really kicked in for me. And so my relationship with food really became very toxic. But interestingly enough, food and dance really drew me into health because I became very interested in that. But it was always this kind of tangled, like, is it about health or is it really about weight? And, as I started to learn more and more, and that's what I studied in school, my degrees in human biology. I also studied exercise science. I worked as a trainer. I did all these things. I love the topic of health and how the body is just amazing, how it functions. But that kind of toxic thread of my relationship with food and my body was always woven in throughout that. And so I became totally obsessed. It was every calorie, every workout, it was all I thought about. It was what I thought about when I went to bed at night and how to do better the next day, and on and on. And probably at my lowest point, I was what I call zombie eating. That's like getting up in the middle of the night and binge eating and not really like being even awake. And that's when I knew, like, okay, this has got to stop. Like, something has got to radically change, and it's not about the food. It's got to be about something else. So I did my own deep dive into healing.
It's interesting. Your story, I think, is a story that we hear from a lot of people, that food is much more about psychology than it is about nutrition. Is that an American thing? Is this something we see around the world, or how has it become that?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that, people label, they don't even say emotional eating, they'll label themselves an emotional eater, like it's just this thing that we're stuck with. And eating's supposed to be emotional. I mean, look at like eons of culture and how we gather around food. It is a pivotal part of how we function as human beings, how we thrive. Food is life, and it should be. In fact, one of our best regulators, appetite regulators, is actually pleasure with food. And yet we've turned it into this weird thing. And so, yeah, I mean, it can be very, very confusing. I think the world of eating psychology is newly evolving, and people are starting to finally realize that it's really not about the food. It's about all the things that food does for us. And those things aren't bad.
So give me a little checklist. How would someone identify themselves? I mean, in some ways, we probably all emotionally eat, some of us more than others.
Right.
But give us a checklist. How would someone know that they have a problem with emotional eating?
Yeah. So I think most importantly, it really goes back to how I would define emotional eating, or just feeling controlled by food. Like, food has a disproportionate amount of control over your life, your energy. And that's kind of the first indicators, I think, for as I'm working with people, because I think a lot of times people either don't realize they're emotional eaters and just blame it on food and yo-yo dieting, or that, that diet didn't work, that kind of a thing. Or they know they are, but they just label it as like, this is just what I do to deal with stress, but they don't know what to do with that. So yeah, that's really the gist of it, I think.
Is there something though that you can tell people that's like, if you do this, you probably have an emotional eating problem? Like if you're stressed and you just sit down with that bowl of ice cream, well, that's probably a pretty good indicator. But what are some other things?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things for sure is when, like I said, when we feel like food has more control over us, and then if you find yourself constantly working on controlling food, that is a really good kind of check. Like, where's your energy going? Where's your mental capacity? How often are you thinking about food, that next snack, that next meal? How, when you're eating, do you feel like it's mindless? And that's another good indicator that emotional eating is a problem for you. I think yo-yo dieting, people that go from one thing to the next, constantly looking for the right thing, is probably a good indicator that it's really not about the food, it's about something else.
One thing that I found for many years working an odd shift is that when, and I did an episode for anyone who's interested, episode number 3 was on sleep, and you can go back and listen to that. But I found that when I didn't sleep well, I was stressed and I ate more. It was almost like I'm so tired that little bit of food, especially trying to keep my energy up during a early morning TV show, that I would just eat to keep energy up. And it was kind of mindless. So many things, you talk about the psychology, but also everything else balances into that, your overall health.
Right. There's so many reasons why we eat, and some of it can be based in the physical. Example, the lack of sleep is a perfect example of that, of how often when our sleep is not where it needs to be, we have cravings. We have sugar cravings, processed food cravings, because those quick carbs just fit the bill. It's like our brain and our body are so brilliant. And so it's going to look for a solution, right? So if you're sleep deprived, what's the solution? Get energy. And if you're used to getting energy from those quick fixes, well, it's going to start craving those things. Those are quick fuels. And it can become this vicious cycle, because then those are the fuels that create the bad sleep in the first place. And then your schedule. I mean, like, I can't imagine having that type of schedule. It all has to be a
balance, but it's like, I had to realize that wasn't healthy anymore. I loved it, but if it was not healthy in many ways, including sleep deprivation and eating well, not feeling energy enough to exercise, like all of that played into my decision to do this instead. And here I am talking to you, very happy.
Yeah.
But let's talk about some solutions. So what can people do if they're identifying with what we're talking about right now? And they're like, wow, I really do that. I reach for things to feel better emotionally, instead of nutritionally or physically, more often, or I yo-yo diet. What do you suggest? Where can you start down this more positive path of eating for health?
Yeah. So I love, first of all, kind of going back to the whole, like, what is this huge topic of emotional eating? And you can just boil it down into the, feel bad, eat food, feel better. That's kind of the blanket statement, right? And so the first thing that I do when I'm working with clients is I really invite them into a new posture with food, because it's really about changing your relationship with food versus just like find the right plan to follow, because then you're just going to be in those cycles. And that frame is really about nourishment. So we look at, like, how are we going to nourish your life with food, with all, with self-care, with all these wonderful things that we can be doing to nourish ourselves, instead of how do I follow a bunch of rules better? And so with this frame of nourishment, and I think women can really grab onto that word in a powerful way, because we know what it's like to nourish someone else. I think sometimes we don't do a good job of nourishing ourselves, but we know what it's like, like to nourish your child. You don't, your child is hungry. You don't just say, oh, okay, here's some protein powder and some water. There you go. Like, no, like, and if they're not feeling good or whatever, you make this wonderful, nourishing, food or meal or something to make them feel better. So we know that word nourishment. And then also to become very curious. I think that's as we posture ourselves into a new relationship with food, to do this from a frame of nourishment and curiosity is really powerful, because then we can start stepping out of dieting consciousness or following all the rules correctly, or just the overall obligation of taking care of ourselves. I think women, we're so stuck in that frame of obligation. What are all the things I should be doing? And then we judge ourselves against how well we're doing those things. And when emotional eating is derailing our lives and all the good intentions that we have, then those things don't matter. What matters is what's motivating, what's behind it. So, and then I put the solutions into two camps. There's the practical, and then there's the deeper work. So we can kind of talk practical first if you want, because those are some of the simpler things to understand. So you referenced diet and taking good care of yourself. That's super important. So there are physical things that can feed into emotional eating. One of those is your eating rhythm. So when I'm working with clients, we look at, okay, when are you eating? Do you think you're like caving into emotional eating at the end of the day because you're willpower weakling, or are you just not fueling yourself? Like breakfast, lunch, the beginning of the day. So many Americans eat the majority of their calories in the latter third of their day. And that's often for women who are living in this kind of dieting consciousness, or this idea of I have to control food. We have more willpower in the morning. We have more willpower when we're busy. And that's when we need to be fueling our bodies. So fueling yourself really, really well at the first part of your day, look at the first 2/3 of your day, can really make a significant impact on then how your evening goes with food. That's usually when people struggle the most. So we always are looking at that. Looking at one of the biggest factors that people don't really understand, or that we're talking about, is how we eat. It's all about what we eat, right? Like, what should I be doing? Keto, paleo, Whole30, all this stuff. Well, so overwhelming, right? How you eat is probably more important than all of that. And so one of the ways, as I'm working with clients, is we look at how fast are you eating? How intentional are you with your eating? How present are you with eating? Because one of the fascinating things about emotional eating is that it has to operate in a vacuum of stress. Because when we are in, we have two systems. We have stress chemistry and relaxation chemistry. That's our sympathetic nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system. We have to have an element of stress that fuels emotional eating, because that kind of checks us out. And so we can turn that off by simply slowing down with how we eat. It's literally how you're eating, right? It's the speed in which you're eating. It's the awareness. It's the sitting down instead of standing in the kitchen. It's the putting the computer at your computer in your car, right?
While studying or anything.
Totally.
So are you saying that we should eat and only eat?
Yeah.
That at the table, you see, I will sit down for breakfast after I get the kids off now with my new schedule. And I have a really hard time just eating breakfast. My phone's with me. I know people relate to this. I'm like, I'll just scroll through Instagram while I'm eating. Are you saying I shouldn't be doing that? Because I'm just trying to multitask. I'm just trying to do a couple of things at once to make my day easier. Are you saying that we should only eat when we're eating?
As much as possible. We don't have to become like this, have this total regime, right? Because, and here's the reason why, Natalie, is because we are, so first of all, when I talked about the stress versus relaxation, right? Mm-hmm. We need to turn that relaxation system on. It's an actual chemistry in our body. And the magic of this is when we can step out of stress chemistry, which is those elevated cortisol levels. We're all learning about cortisol, right? And turn on our relaxation kind of system in our body, well, some magical things happen. We, first of all, will naturally regulate our appetite way more. We have a process of digestion called the cephalic phase response. That's, cephalic means our brain, our head. And it accounts for, experts will say, between 40 and 60% of our digestive process starts in our mind. And so in our mind is where all of our pleasure centers, so taste, sight, aroma, smell, even sound of like the cooking process, your brain is firing like, oh, okay, food is happening. We're ready to eat. This is exciting. And so when you can slow down and relax and become very present with your food, you're using all of those intelligence centers, all of your senses to tell your body you're eating. And that's really, really important for our digestion. And what will happen is we'll naturally regulate our appetite. We will be better fat burners. Everybody's all about, being a fat burner. Oh, you got to do keto. Well, relaxed eating can do the same thing for you. You will need less calories because your body will burn them more efficiently, and it's going to take in your nutrients of your food more efficiently as well. So you won't have hunger that's simply coming from a lack of nutrients because your body isn't getting all the good stuff you're feeding it. So that relaxation process is so important. The other piece of that is pleasure. So our body uses pleasure as an appetite regulator. It's not pleasure with food is bad. It's pleasure in a relaxed, present state is very, very powerful to be able to let go of, unwind from emotional eating simply because of the relaxation state of our body.
I love this. As a matter of fact, we try really hard to have family dinners. One kid at college and 2 at home. So with the 4 of us in the household, we try, but with practices and, we're eating on the fly like most families now that life is getting back to normal. But one thing that I do, and I think you're going to tell me you like this, so I'm hoping, and I actually don't talk about it, but I realize that I do it, is we sit down to dinner. And the first thing I do after, I try to get the whole family to help with dinner, but it always ends up being, I'm putting the plates on the table while someone else is doing something else. I get the dinner. And finally, when I sit down, I take this deep breath and I just kind of and it feels so good to me. And then somebody needs something, I have to get back up. But it feels so good to me. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say, is to get in that I'm going to eat and I'm going to enjoy this. And I'm going to think about what I'm eating and I'm going to enjoy the smell of it first. And then I'm going to think about how I cooked it. Are all of these things good?
Yes.
Okay.
It's so powerful.
Do more of that. Okay.
And guess what? You can do that with a bowl of ice cream as well. Okay. So one of the most interesting, counterintuitive tools that I'll use with clients, especially those who struggle with what they would call binge eating, which that can run the gamut of like what is actual binge eating. But if you feel like it's binge eating, then it's binge eating for you. Is to practice those principles with that food that you feel like has so much control over your life, right? It's amazing what can happen. Look at other cultures, like how they eat, right? There's so much ritual around it. We have lost that. And you look at the cultures that have that element of ritual with a cup of tea, even like a tea ceremony. Oh my gosh, it's incredible. It's beautiful. The Chinese culture has, they knew that we've known this for forever. And yet our culture has lost it because everything is about efficiency, multitasking, and numbers. How many calories, macros, points, whatever does this food have? Your body doesn't run on math. It really doesn't. And so I love the idea of, like what you said, of coming back to just, you created a ritual around the sanctity of having a meal. And that's so powerful.
I realize that I do it, but I don't think I've ever shared it. Maybe my family has witnessed it. But the other thing that concerns me is, as a mom, we all think, what am I teaching my kids by modeling and by being this crazy person who is just like eating in the car and drive through or whatever, because our lives are so busy. And again, getting back to normal. We actually had a chance during the pandemic to change some rituals with more time at home. But now that we're kind of getting back to normal, I think about, as a mom, that modeling. And, if we eat at the computer and at the television or on the go, that's exactly what we are teaching our kids to do and setting them up for emotional eating in their futures.
Right. Exactly. And modeling is so important versus lecturing or here's what we do, just to model that. And, it can be as simple as even a snack. Like emotional eating is very reactionary. And so you need to be able to step out of that reactionary mode with food. And that starts, I think the easiest place to do that is to start with meals. But then the in-between times is usually when people struggle the most, right? It's like, oh, my meals are all healthy, but then it's like 20 trips to the pantry. But becoming intentional with that as well is so important. And then, finding the areas, the moments in life that really have nothing to do with food. I think that's, as I'm working with clients, it's amazing. They're always surprised. Like, we talk about food, like maybe 20% of the time, but the rest is even more is about what's going on internally, because it's really not about the food.
I'm really going to change some things. I mean, I sit at this computer where I'm doing this right now with breakfast sometimes. If it's not my phone, then it's here because I'm just trying to get stuff done. But I'm going to make a very conscious effort to just eat, even if I'm by myself, and just enjoy the food. And I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to try it. So I have a couple of questions that I ask all of my guests. And I just think that people that are successful with something have other things to share about the way they live their lives, their productivity, and so on. So my first question is that on productivity. What's one productivity tip or tool that you have here? We're talking about being so busy and everything, but it doesn't have to even be a tool or technology, but what's something you can share with people for productivity?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. You know what? I have two, if I can share two.
Sure.
One is on a deeper level, and I'm going to start with this, and that's authenticity. That is probably the biggest tool that I use in my coaching practice. Emotional eating, kind of going back to that topic, is often driven by inauthenticity that's caused by stress in our lives, the stress that we create because we're not in alignment. There's something that's off. And so that's probably my favorite thing, to look at authenticity and how am I out of alignment with what really matters to me, because that will produce inefficiency and stress and like just bog everything down like nothing else. So that's probably my favorite tool of creating, like, what is a daily ritual or something to do to just get me back into alignment with what really matters. And that helps me prioritize. It helps me to also, in the moments of real time, like find that stress, find that threatening emotion, instead of numbing it or escaping it with something like productivity or like food, right? Like, oh, I need to go do the dishes. No, I need to deal with the stress that I'm carrying in my body. So how do I do that?
Tip. I love that.
So that's my favorite. And then second, totally practical, is actually my yoga ball, because I sit at my computer. I'm doing Zoom sessions with my clients. I'm on the computer. I'm writing, doing all this stuff. I love sitting on those big therapy balls,
Yeah.
Because it just keeps me kind of in my body. It keeps me moving a little bit, and that helps me just have a little bit more fun. Like, I put my music on and I'm just kind of moving myself.
Makes you stay aware. Like, I find myself kind of doing this in my chair. You can't do that when you're sitting on a yoga ball. It keeps you active.
And then you kind of just feel like like a zombie. And so I love my yoga ball. I sit on it all day. So that's
I'm gonna have to go get mine. I have one in the basement that
hasn't
been used for a while, so I might have to bring it up here to my desk. Okay, so thank you. Those are awesome productivity tips. And then my second question is, and you talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the podcast, but what is your purpose? When did you know in life? I think maybe I ask everyone this question because I have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old, and that's when you're really trying to figure out life. But for some people, myself included, I have like this second career and I figured it out, and it happens at different times in people's lives. So what is your purpose, and when did you realize it?
Oh, I love that question too. You know what? It's so funny. I think in the season of 40s, because I'm 48, and it's such an amazing time to reinvent yourself. I love working with women, especially in this life stage. And that's really, like, my early 40s is really when it kind of hit me. I I had been operating a food business for many, many years here in Denver. And I realized through all of my kind of life experience that I was really being called to come kind of bring it together full circle and really help women transform their relationship with food instead of feeding people, which I had done for years and years, or just working in like health and wellness, things like that, just really bringing it full circle. And what's funny is, do you remember the movie Sister Act with
Yes.
Whoopi Goldberg? So
Sure.
whenever that came out, I don't know, a long time ago, there's a scene in that movie that just has always stuck in the back of my mind, and I wasn't sure why. I actually started crying, and it was a scene where Whoopi, she's the nun undercover, and she is working with this choir of nuns that needs some major help, and this little shy girl in the back, she brings her forward, and she gets her voice out of her, like literally. And
Yes,
I don't know if you remember that scene.
I do.
And she like presses her stomach and this voice just like explodes
Out of
from her.
nowhere.
Oh my God. I start bawling. And I'm like, okay, Lord, that's interesting. What just happened there? And I just kind of tucked that away. And then, like I said, when I was really knowing like, okay, I got to reinvent myself, something needs to change, that came to mind. And I knew like, I want to do something that helps to just draw the greatness out of women. And doing that through a vehicle like somebody's relationship with food is such a powerful way to do that, because our relationship with food, there's this quote, how you do food is how you do life. It's so true. Our relationship with food is just that doorway. It's a doorway into something much deeper. I talk about the out of alignment, something's not authentic with your life. And that's where my energy goes with my clients. And it's so powerful. I love it so much.
What a great expertise for you, and what a blessing you are
Thank you.
in helping women with something so many people, myself included, struggle with. So where can people find out more information about you, your tips, and everything you do?
Yeah. Well, Facebook is where I am most of the time. So just on my personal page, like I love to have people connect with me there. You can send me, a private message through Facebook would be amazing. I also have a group. It's a free group. It's Transforming Mind, Body, and Food for Freedom. And I think the link to that will probably be in the show notes. But it's open to women to come, and I'm in there almost every day doing some pretty in-depth trainings around, specific parts of this whole deal, this relationship with food. I know today we've talked more generally, but that's the best way to connect with me.
Well, I love that, because we are better together when we share each other's stories, when we support each other and know that you're not the only one who struggles with this. So I'm going to join your Facebook group, and I just appreciate you so much. And I will, as you said, put all that information in the show notes, and let's talk again soon. Great to connect with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie.